ප්‍රශ්න 1000ක් දරුවන්ට කොහොම උගන්වන්නද?
Pearson BTech HND in Business Management. උසස් පෙළ සිසුන් සඳහා ශිෂ්‍යාර්ථ 200ක් 077 133 55 11 AIC campus. ජාතියේ දුව දරුවන් වෙනුවෙන්මයි.
Public platform instead of him utilizing the police to waste my time.
ප්‍රසිද්ධ විවාදවල ඔබතුමායන ඔබතුමා කැමති කෙනෙක් අරන් යන්න මමත් ඒකට කැමති කෙනෙක් අරන් එන්න. අපිට තියෙන කරුණුත් එක්ක අපි සාකච්ඡා කරමු. අපි රටක් හේතු බුද්ධිමත්.
Hi, thank you all for having me here. So I will make it very short because you all have heard pretty much, I think, 2 hours of speeches. First and foremost, I'll let you know why I'm here. I'm actually in Geneva on behalf of one of my friends and colleagues who are in Parliament, who is having a rigorous imprisonment for contempt of court. But as you know, in Sri Lanka, the contempt of court is not really defined how it is going to be. And also, there have been International Parliamentarian Union decision adopted unanimously about his arrest. And also, we're here with 2 RFR applications, that's fundamental right applications of 2 senior officers who dealt with the East attacks. And if you go through that, I have all those documents. If anybody is interested here, you can have that. You will know exactly what has happened in the East attacks and which the government is underplaying. And also transgression of justice for one of my colleagues who was in the cabinet. He's an MP now, and how things have turned out in Sri Lanka. Just like Alan said, it's going to overlap because everybody was talking about the PTA. Therefore, I will also move into my speech, which I will try to do it very quick as possible. So as you all know, it's 43 years ago, in 1979, in response to an increasing incidence of interracial violence, Sri Lanka passed the Prevention Terrorism Act. At that time, the law was being passed. It was proposed to only be a temporary law for a temporary problem. Rising incidents, ethnic-based criminal violences by armed groups against civilians and state, or what we call today terrorism. The PTA was presented to Parliament, debated and passed all in one day. The draconian measures were meant to adopt shock and away strategy. It would authorize the state to brute force and subjugate and control not only race-based violent criminals or terrorists, but to end the terrorism in Sri Lanka once and for all. The lawmakers at that time, people from my very own party, believed that this strategy would work. They believed that the power to detain people without charge for 18 months, the power to deny bail, to prevent judicial review of arbitrary actions, and to criminalize writings and speech, no matter their intention, no matter of what their intention. We all necessary to cull and the threat of terror even before it began. The reality, of course, was starkly different. Did the PTA end terrorism in Sri Lanka? The answer is no. In fact, the history shows us the PTA worsened Sri Lankan terrorism and other problems. It stopped us from trying to understand crime. It stopped us from listening to real grievances of minority communities. It stopped us from respecting the rule of law, our shared cultural values, ultimately human life. 4 years after PTA was passed in 1983, Sri Lanka entered a full-scale civil war. 9 years after PTA was passed in 1988, Sri Lanka was fighting 2 wars. Once again, the separatist groups in the north and the east, and another against Marxist revolutionary group in the south. In less than 10 years from date, the enactment of PTA, my country was engulfed in war and conflict in all 4 corners. The PTA didn't solve any of it. In fact, it probably contributed to it all. Tens and thousands of Sri Lankans being arrested, tortured, disappeared, or killed by PTA. The ultimate arbitrary questioning power it gives the state to arrest without cause or detain without charge has given unprecedented powers to hand of few. Tamils, Sinhalese, Muslims, shopkeepers, bakers, mechanics, poets, lawyers, YouTubers. We all have fallen victim to the law of hell. I myself nearly became another trigger PTA detainee recently. When I exposed in Parliament a serious allegation of conspiracy, conclusion by those at top of our government to unleash the mayhem of Easter Sunday terror attacks in Sri Lanka. I myself was threatened to be detention under PTA. I was actually lucky because I got the information, I ran into a hospital, got myself admitted, and ended up finding out I had 4 blocks. at 41 years and did open heart surgery. So I thank, in a way, for PTA coming behind me, and I saved my life. They were finding investigation officers. They were cries of people who lost their loved ones in an act of political cruelty and manipulated, unprecedented for democracy. Today in Sri Lanka, the terrorists have become not those who plan or perpetrate the murder of 300 of our own people. The terrorists are not those who have taken innocent life while they pray in churches or eat their breakfast. The terrorists are those that demand accountability. They are the ones exposing the criminal masterminds behind atrocities. They are the people asking answers to the loss of loved ones. The terrorist has become justice in itself, and that is the final outcome of PTA. Justice itself becomes terrorism under the law of very articulate and purpose that has been to break it down. And that is why we must end these 4 decades of terror by repealing and replacing the PTA. Terrorism can be prevented by empowering institutions, making the police independent of political interferences, having judicial and civilian oversight over law enforcement, sharing intelligence, and most importantly, through listening to and addressing grievances of our own people. Excuse me. Terrorism is the outcome of the democratic deceit. Therefore, the solution of strengthening democracy, not further undermining it. Just a few weeks ago, Sri Lankan government proposed amendments to a PTA. These new proposals sadly leave us most abused provisions of the PTA very much intact. It will do little to give comfort to the millions of belongings of Sri Lankan ethnic religious minorities that have been overwhelming victims of the law. It will do very little to give comfort to Sri Lankan Christian community who are being threatened with detention for demanding justice of the Easter attacks. The new amendment still fails to define terrorism. It does not limit the powers given to the authorities to detain individuals without a cause, without immediate judicial oversight. It even forced to change the status of the confessions obtained by the police custody, even if those confessions were obtained under torture. This amendment is an attempt to whitewash Sri Lankan government of its failure to abide by its duties to its own people, to protect their constitutional rights, to guarantee them their freedom. 43 years later, we have still failed as a nation to understand the true gravity of democratic decline set by this law. Today, we have not only declined as a democracy, but we are on the verge of an economic collapse and a meltdown. Dismantling the independent institutions in 2020, which our government painstakingly started to rebuild from 2015 to 2019, has led to a political, social, economic catastrophe unprecedented in a modern history. Today, as I speak to you here in Geneva, my fellow countrymen are without electricity nearly for 8 hours. They are queuing up for hours to obtain fuel for their vehicles. They can't afford to even square 2 meals a day. Arbitraries and unaccountabilities, the impunity has seeped into every aspect of our lives. Today, it has seeped into our homes and to our stomachs. Tomorrow, when the strong arm of the state crushes the hunger people wanting justice, it would have seeped into very neat creative of our nation. It would be the end of our nation as we know it. It would be the end of our times. So, here I am to speak to you, to seek your help. Sri Lanka journey of impunity needs to stop. Its journey of silencing and imprisoning honest people like my friend Ranjan Ramanayaka, who has been imprisoned for 4 years for demanding justice and calling out corruption, needs to stop. It's a journey of race, ethnic-based politics needs to stop. Its journey towards economic destruction needs to stop. Our people deserve better. Will you help us get there? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Harin Fernando. That was a very